Okay, there we go. We're live. Excellent. Happy Friday, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the live show. Oh, this wouldn't be the time if I don't mess with this audio cable there. Get that sorted out. Let's start with a little sip of tea. I've injured my elbow joint somehow, so it's quite painful to lift. And that means that I can't do bicep curls, which, as we are all well aware of, is the most important. That's the show muscle in the gym, and that's not available. So it's very annoying. Also, this camera is lagging. I think because I've got it plugged into a hub instead of the computer. Whatever. It's not why we're all here. That's just the technical issues that we like to start the live show with to create a sense of humanity with me. Okay, well, we're the start of a new year, Jan 9th, and I think I titled this Jan 6th, maybe. I don't know. January 9th, so we're kicking off 2026 in the live show fashion. We've got a bunch of topics today. We're going to talk about the signal to noise ratio and the implications of AI in terms of that signal to noise ratio. Like, what does AI do with regarding signal to noise ratio on the internet? And then what's the implication of that? We'll look about how leadership happens in partnership with our circumstances and what that actually means and how we often get that mistaken. We'll talk about the way that reacting to our fear actually makes our fear real. So how we end up becoming or creating the reality of what we're afraid of, how we put that into the world. So we'll draw that out and talk about what you can do about it. We're going to talk about using leadership in the wrong direction. What's the right and wrong direction for leadership? Talk about money as a painkiller and why that's so effective. And we're going to talk about maximizing, not giving a fuck. Min-maxing, NGAF. Let me lean down. Let me fill this tea. Let me talk a little bit about this week, and then we'll kick it. So, for those of you that follow the show, that follow my work, you know that we're off to the retreat in Costa Rica in a little under 2 weeks. So, it tends to be a fairly busy time of the year where things are fairly compressed for the first 2 weeks of January, and that's because it's on the heels of December, which I take off. So I take all of December and all of June off every year, have a sabbatical month, give myself some space to really drop in and to be with myself. And this December was rad. Historically, I found December quite challenging for a bunch of reasons. One is that there's a ton of candy and cookies and we'll call like calorically dense food available everywhere. And my lovely wife is a great baker and loves to make treats and loves to have treats in the house. Then there's eggnog, which rules. And then there's lots of booze. And so there's all of that stuff around. And for me, one of the things I guess you could say learn to do in my arc as a human is mitigate boredom by consuming food and alcohol, like just stimulate myself through my mouth. And so what can happen when I take a month off in Christmas is rather than settle into spaciousness, which my ego or my survival mechanism relates to as boredom. I'll talk more about that in a sec. Maybe I'll make a note here. Do this description. Boredom chat. Or I should call it boring chat. But I have this month off, and what happens is that I end up kind of like, I don't know what to do. I'm twiddling my thumbs, and then I start managing my boredom. I start kind of taking action to fix or change or protect or do whatever I do to kind of overcome the boredom. And that typically means I eat a bunch, I drink a bunch, I play a bunch of video games, all of which are totally fine, except that who I'm being underneath is not, I'm not eating a cookie for enjoyment. I'm not playing a video game because I'm really intrigued by it or drawn into it. I'm doing all that because I can't be with the feeling of being bored. So who I'm being is kind of reacting to this underlying story or feeling of being bored, as opposed to doing something I'm really enjoying. So that's often how December is gone. And then on the heels of it, at the end of that, I feel really shitty. I feel fat. I feel like, I kind of wasted a month. What was even the point of that? All that. So this month had a lot of time for vacation. It had a lot of time for taking on some projects. It had a lot of time to drop in and really immerse myself in a video game. I'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. Overall, there was like room for all of that stuff, including some time to sit on the couch and get fat. And so this is really, the sweet spot for me where there's time to do all of those things, but I'm not kind of skewing too much in one direction or the other. I find if I spend an entire month just being productive, then there's a younger part of me, we'll call it like a teenage self, or, maybe adolescent, or just this part of me that's like, but I want to stay up late. And why do I have to keep getting up at 7 a.m.? And the holidays are an opportunity to kind of get to stay up later and wake up later, eat a little less structured or whatever it happens to be. And so if I don't give myself some of that, that part of me never gets expressed. And then it's sort of like it starts to act out in the rest of my life. So it's important I have some of that, but then it's also important that I have like some opportunity where instead of just doing that or only doing that, I also put up stuff in my garage so I can hang shoes on the wall, whatever it happens to be. So this holiday was really, really cool. Um, the one of the things I got into over the holidays, I really wanted to immerse myself in a video game. Um, and so the game of the year, the game I was playing is a game that won a ton of awards called Expedition 33, and then its subtitle was Claire Obscura. And the I thought this was a super cool game. Really, really neat design pattern. The mechanics of it were really cool, and the underlying story was really quite touching and very, very beautiful. Ultimately, um, like I'm a big fan of movies like that evoke something in us to an extent. I don't really like. I guard myself against watching movies that I know are going to destroy my heart. Make me really sad or be an emotional, like rock me emotionally. But I like the art of film and how like it can evoke something, create something in us. And I'm a big fan of like artists like Tarantino, the Coen brothers. These are the sort of things I like. And I like video games that do the same thing, that use the medium of a video game to really evoke something in us. And I thought that Claire Obscura Expedition 33 was like really beautiful at this. It really did a great job of speaking to grief and loss, not in a heavy-handed way, but in a very artistic way, a way that really like illuminated, a way that really was compelling to learn and watch and read about, and like that was like a really beautiful emotional journey. So if you're looking for an interesting game, something that might be worthy of losing yourself in something that's really like a compelling story, I would highly recommend that game. It was really, really cool. Anything else I want to talk about the holidays before we get into our topics here? I should take off this cardigan and I should speak to boredom a little bit first. So we live in a state, I would say right now, like our world is one where, many of you've probably read Cal Newport's book or at least heard of it, Deep Work. And in that book, he talks a lot about this ability to sequester ourselves and do deep work to bring our focus to bear on something and really work with it. And his argument is that as time goes on, that's going to become more and more valuable. Hey, Sonny, thanks for dropping in. And it's an interesting question because I wonder, will that become more and more valuable, or will we just turn the deep work over to AI? Is that actually what's going to happen? Is deep work like just a little too soon? And consequently, now that we've got all this AI in place, that's no longer going to be a thing. And actually humans are going to be more frivolous. We're going to be more easily distractible. But anyhow, one of the things I noticed for myself is that there are things that I want to ideate, things that I want to bring into the world, that I want to birth into the world, that I want to make happen, for which it requires a degree of spaciousness for me to kind of let the idea fully come to being. So, for example, I've got ideas for programs or the next book that I want to write, things like this. But in order to really sit down and drop into that and do the kind of thinking that requires, the kind of brainstorming, all of that, I need to create a bit of spaciousness. What more often happens is like on a weeknight or a weekday or a weekend when I would have the time to do that, I'll be like, all right, great, I've got some time. And then I'll sit down and I'll take like maybe 2-3 minutes and I'll start to be like, okay, and I'll spend, I don't know, half hour, an hour, whatever, until eventually I'm like, I want to go play video games or I want to go stimulate myself. And so what's happening ontologically in terms of who I'm being is that I'm entering into a low stimulus state. This means I'm entering into a state where there's not a lot coming in. I'm not consuming a lot of stimulation. So I'm not what TV, very high stimulation. Video games, very high stimulation. Sugar, high stimulation. Booze, these are all stimulative things. To really get into a generative state, I gotta stop having so much coming in, because if a lot is coming in, there's not a lot internally that has to generate. Instead, most of the energy that's happening inside of me is going towards processing the incoming. So to start to get to this place where I can ideate, where I can create what's next, where I can brainstorm, where I can let my own ideas come forward, where I can do blue sky thinking, I have to first kind of enter into a state where there's not much stimulus coming in. And doing so is a little bit like, this will be a digression into an analogy, but hopefully you can hang with me. Have you ever gone away on vacation and eaten a bunch of rich food and it's like super good? And then you come home and all the food is super boring and you just want to like go out to a restaurant, you want to order in takeout. And what's happened is that your palate has become adapted to really rich, oily, buttery, fatty, sugary, etc. foods. It's developed a taste. It's adapted to sort of discerning that level of taste. And what happens when we come home is now our palate is attenuated, you know, like our antenna has been tuned to that frequency, and we can either continue eating that way, which will fatten us up and will have its own problems. It's more expensive too, or we can kind of settle back in and be with that experience as our palate readapts. And so this type of adaptation from going from high stimulus down to lower is challenging, especially when it's new. And so it's like I'm in this process of adapting my energetic palette to be able to work with less. And that's really the part of the project I'm taking on for this new year is like really reducing the amount of stimulus that I'm working with, cutting out a lot of this stuff, a lot of booze, a lot of sugar, a lot of TV, a lot of, you know, phone before bed, you name it. All of these are high stimulus activities. And I notice that in order to get to the place where I can really empower that, I have to walk through this period where my palate is not picking up much and wants more. You know, so this is that period where you're eating your dinner after coming home from vacation and you're like, this is missing something, and you want to put more salt on, or you want to put more butter on your potato, or whatever it happens to be. The way this occurs for me is like I'm sitting there at my computer and the part of me is like, yo, you should like load up Twitter, or you should load up Discord, or you should put a TV show on, or you know, you should drink more coffee while you're working. You know, do something. So at least you're working, but then I'm finding another way to stimulate myself. And so this period of readaptation that I'm talking about, my survival mechanism, the part of me designed to keep me in the status quo, it relates to that experience, that period, as boredom. And what happens is that I I loathe boredom. I put a lot of energy and work into not being bored. And so one of the things I'm really working on this year is training a new relationship to this experience of spaciousness. And it's really, really tough because we live in a world where, at least in terms of energy, stimulation, and input, we are eating a lot of rich food. You know, that in terms of, it's analogous to that. It's like in terms of the day-to-day stimulation that we consume, it's like we're all constantly on vacation eating the richest food. We're very obese in terms of our consumption when it comes to energy, high frequency sort of products. And so that's one of the things that's really big for me, that's really up for me this year, is to create a lot more stillness, a lot more spaciousness, and to, you know, something of an experiment, and to notice like what grows out of that, what gets created from that place when I really let myself sit into the boredom and then drop below it. And so I notice this is analogous to a whole bunch of other stuff where there's a clear goal that I want to arrive at, and there's a process that will bring me there, and between where I am currently, where the process will lead me, and where I want to arrive, there's this crappy period that I don't want to be in, where the old patterns become really, really comforting. So that's kind of what's up for me this new year. I'm at the stage right now where that feels novel, where it's new, and so I'm still like a little more, yeah, let's do it. But we're what are we, January 9th? As time goes on, that's going to start to become less interesting, less exciting, less fun, and then it becomes more of a slog. And for anyone that's ever gone to the gym past January 31st, you know what this period is like. This is the period where the novelty is worn off, you are not yet really seeing the results that you want, and then the real work sets in. That's where the work part happens. In any transformational process, this is part of what you have to go through, is getting beyond the point where there's novelty and the easy push of that, getting beyond the point where the I suck and I need to do something about it has worn off, and now you're just left in the only reason to keep doing this is because I said that I'm committed to creating something, and that's just not that compelling in the moment. So that's what we're approaching. That's what's on the horizon for me. Let me answer this message that my lovely wife has just sent me, and then come right back. There we go. I'm going to re-pour some tea. Get that on the mic. We want to make sure that tea pouring came through loud and clear. Let's have a slurpy sip together. Ooh, lovely. That tastes like mint tea. Okay. Signal to noise ratio and the implications of AI. So here's some of what I'm noticing is happening with the burgeoning, we're past the point of burgeoning, with the explosion, we'll say, of AI generated content. And I'm including AI generated content in sort of any content where it may not be entirely, like it might not be someone who's just said, AI, write me an entire post on thought leadership so that I can put that on LinkedIn. There's plenty of that, but there's also plenty where people are like, here's 5 thoughts I have, arrange this into a post. And then there's like varying degrees to which you can move through this. You can do it right from the start where you're just like, write me a post to post every day on thought leadership to position me as an authority. And then you can go all the way to the other end, which is like, here's a post I've written. Please, it's 800 words, whittle this down to 750 and catch any grammar mistakes. You have the full spectrum. So what I notice is happening is that this is reducing the discrepancy between signal and noise in the atmosphere, the environment. So signal to noise, let's talk about like leadership as the conversation, but this applies across the board. Leadership is just an easy one. The noise of leadership is people posting stuff like the 5 bullet points that are obviously true. As soon as you read it, you already know about it, this sort of thing. Or the 5 bullet points about like, here's what you have to do to make this, it's just very, it's totally fine. It's not that it's bad or wrong. It's not that interesting. It's not that distinct. It doesn't really create that much. It's just more of the same. You probably, if you're watching this show, you probably know what I'm talking about. And so this is the noise. And for a long time, everyone wanted to have a take on leadership, and lots of people would make effort to do so, but it required that you sit down and write 750 words that were coherent, that had a point, that had a thread running through them, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was like a bunch of effort required to just contribute to the noise. The first thing that AI has done is it's radically reduced the effort required to contribute to the noise, to contribute anything, right? But to like generate content, AI has completely taken away all of the effort that is required. You don't have to put any effort in. You can say, just write a post about this in my voice. Here's an essay I wrote in grade 12. Make it sound kind of like that. Don't use em dashes or hyphens, because that's the giveaway, right? Or at least it used to be. Write it in my voice, blah, 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 put it out there. Minimal effort. And so the first thing is that what that's done is that there was a whole bunch of people that wanted to contribute to the space or the conversation, but didn't really want to have to exert the effort required to do so. So, up until this point, that effort created a bit of a gatekeeper. It meant that it was sort of like way back in the day, being published at all required a huge amount of work. And so it allowed us to have a degree of trust. It allowed us to, there was like a degree of curation. In if someone was published, we could trust that this had gone through some kind of process. So there was some degree of thought behind this because it wasn't just some, you know, dickwad off the street that just shouted at someone and then they wrote it on paper, right? There was like a process behind it. There was effort that went into it. And due to that effort, we could trust, okay, there's been something put into this. And then blogs became big and popular. And what that did was it minimized the effort to being published. So being published stopped being so relevant or important. And as a result, books started to carry more weight. Anyone could write a blog post. Of course, not everyone could, not everyone did, and there was many, many good writers, but actually becoming published online became it was less effort, and therefore it carried less weight. The less effort, the less energy that needs to be put into something, the less weight we're going to ascribe to it. And so as a result, books. Then there was this explosion. Amazon really and self-publishing, all that made it much, much, much easier to publish books. And again, as a result, the effort went down. And therefore, more people were publishing books because it was easier to do so. So I am not suggesting that any of these steps along the way is bad or negative or shouldn't have happened, but I'm acknowledging that there's consequences to each of these things that have happened. And the main consequence we're looking at here is that because of the reduction in effort, it means that there's more people doing it. And because there's more people doing it, we can't rely so much on the curation that happens by the cost of effort to entry. I'm gonna have a sip so I get charged up. AI has, so every step along the way, right? Starting really with like the Gutenberg or the movable type press or, whatever, through to like blogs, through to the internet and websites, allowing people to express themselves more into the public space, through to social media, through to blah, 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 blah. Every step along the way has reduced effort by some corresponding amount. I would argue that that effort reduction has, for the most part, been linear or geometric. And what AI has done has made it an exponential reduction in effort. So even though we had this period where anyone could have a blog, you still had to write semi-coherently. You still had to have a grasp of the English language. You still had to be able to at least carry a thought coherently through 750 words. For the most part, you needed to be able to use paragraphs to get read, and so on and so forth. AI has removed all of that. So none of that is a requirement. There's absolutely zero requirement anymore that you have any command of the English language, that you have any ability to formulate a thought beyond the point of formulating a thought. Like it used to be, you'd have a thought like people should be kinder in some situations, but less kind in others. And there's some leadership in that. And then you would actually have to think about that, put it into words. Now, all you have to do is have that thought, and then you put it in AI. It's even further than that. You don't even have to have that thought. You can just say, write something about leadership, and then it will create that. And because AI is so good, it creates something that's quite well put together, well written, compelling. So all of the hallmarks of effort, all of the things that previously indicated effort went into this, and therefore it's worth your time and consideration, all of that's gone. All of the means by which we sort of mentally filtered, curated the content coming in, all of that has been taken away. We can no longer rely on any of that. And so what this does, well, let me bring this back to my main premise before we come to the conclusion here. So up until this point, all of these things, like the effort that went into this, were ways for me to discern, is this part of the signal that I am seeking to hear, or is this part of the background noise? So if I was like reading something and I saw someone, you know, write like a long thing without paragraphs or anything, I was like, this is probably not really the signal of like a thought leader or like high-minded leadership or academia, the things I'm seeking. This is not really, I don't think that this is actually present. I can filter this out because it's lacking the stuff, the effort that, or the hallmark, the signs of effort put into this that I know I'm seeking. So it became easier to filter the signal from the noise. AI has moved noise much, much, much closer to the signal. And so as a result, what happens is that we have to put in more energy to discern between the signal and the noise. Imagine if you were using an old-timey radio, with an analog dial, and so you're moving the dial and you hear static, 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 and then you can start to hear the sounds of a song come through, and then you're like, as you move the dial, it gets closer and closer until you're hearing it quite clear, and you continue to move it, and then it gets more and more staticky until all you hear is fuzz. This is sort of like the process by which you discern the noise of the background radio waves from the actual signal of the radio station. What AI has effectively done is it's like you're now moving that dial, but instead of hearing signal, you hear something that sounds almost like an actual song. It has like some sort of rhythm to it. It has kind of lyrics, except it's not. Until eventually you get to the radio signal, the actual song that's an actual song by an actual human, and then you're back into this background sort of blurry, near almost like. So that's what AI has created. Now we'll talk about the consequences of that. But hopefully I've drawn out the first part of the thesis, which is that the signal and the noise now are very, very close. There's a few consequences to that. Consequence number one is that it takes more effort and more time to discern signal from noise. You have to put more energy into reading the thing, or into listening to the thing, or into looking at the thing, before you realize this is just bunk. There's not actually anything here. Just like, and the reason is because there's more stuff that looks much closer to the thing. So you have to walk the path for longer before you realize, oh, these diverge. Think of it like if there's a road that you really want to follow. Now the new roads that AI are providing are very, very close, and it takes longer for them to start to diverge. And as a result, you then have to walk along that road for longer before you notice the divergence and realize this is actually not what I'm after. The second thing is that it's created a much higher quantity of things that are the noise. So not only is the sort of the noisy stuff, the stuff that's not the signal, that stuff is, the quality of it is better. It's closer to the signal we seek. There's also the quantity is much higher. So there's, the stuff is better, it's closer, it's like a nearer facsimile, and there's more of it. And so these two things mean that our filtering process internally has to become more rigorous. It doesn't have to, but like if we want to find that signal, we have to listen more closely to discern for ourselves, is this or isn't it actually what I'm after? And we have to do that more often because there's just so much of it. So we're filtering through more and more and more stuff, and it's harder and harder to filter through that stuff. So it's like, it's compounded, right? There's like, it's not 2x, it's 4x or 10x or 100x. It just requires way more effort. So that's the first consequence of what AI has put into the space. The second consequence is demonstrated right here, where I have 2 viewers and 1 thumbs up. Hey, someone put another thumbs up there just so we can exponentially grow the thumbs up on this particular live stream. The consequence is that we humans, we can't devote that energy. We're exhausted by it. We're just like, oh, I can't even. Like, I can't make that discernment. I don't want to. It's energetically taxing for us to actually get at the signal of what we want. We have to, it requires too much. And so when we're faced with a non-urgent situation, if this was life and death, we would devote our discernment to that. But it's not. It's more sort of like, where might I better myself? Where's the content about World War I that I want? Whatever it happens to be. So instead, a couple of things happen. One is we stop trying to discern. We start to settle for good enough. All right, this isn't really quite the sort of thing that I was looking for, but it's close enough. I'm going to settle for that. So our muscle in discerning becomes kind of overwhelmed, and then it gives up. It like almost resigns, or we just stop using it, and then it atrophies, which then hastens this process. So then we become overwhelmed even more easily, and then we give up sooner, and then we atrophy further. So that ability to filter, to discern signal from noise, that muscle loses its potency, becomes weaker and weaker as time goes on. Which has us kind of settle more often. And then the next thing that happens is that people that are not already producing really high quality signal fall out. Because now, if you imagine there's this gradient of like, wow, this is like, we'll say Tony Robbins as our example. This is the Tony Robbins level of leadership. This guy's got all this, he's like speaking pure what we're looking for. And then there's Adam Quiney, down here. And then there's Jim Reggie, who's just starting out down here. Jim Reggie's signal is simply not as clean or as pure or as aligned. Hey, America, nice to see you. Not as aligned with a lot of the other, with Tony Robbins. It's just not quite as pure a signal. And as a result, Jim Reggie is just gonna not, yes, we hit that 2 thumbs up. Fantastic. Jim Reggie is not going to be able to compete. People are not going to be able to discern between what he is saying and all of the people pejoratively call AI slop in the field. There's just not going to be a place to compete, and Jim Reggie's going to fall out. So what happens is a lot of the beginners, a lot of the low end just drops out completely and gets filled in by this AI content. As time goes on, we'll probably see more and more of this. We'll see more and more places where the signal to noise just becomes so muddy, and so they'll become so close that we'll stop looking to humans for it. And this is ultimately what the Turing test is about. And the Turing test is, can a human determine, if you put this robot thing in a box and then have the human interact with it only through like, typing or whatever, can a human discern whether this is actually a human or actually a robot? As time goes on, AI is closing that gap. And so, like for things like AI generated art, over time, the beginner art has less of a space to show up because it gets filled in with AI art. And it's, people are like, I can't really discern at the level of appreciation and filtering that I'm doing for my own needs and desires for art. I don't care. So I'm just going to go with the cheaper alternative. So that's kind of like what I see happening as far as like AI and its implications in the field and stuff like that. I don't really know where that leads. It's certainly going to create a revolution. It's kind of interesting because historically we've talked about, the AI revolution is coming, and what it's going to do is it's going to free humans up from having to do mundane tasks or things that they don't want, or the low level work. But in fact, it's more like what AI is doing is it's removing our ability to do the low level work. It's taking that out of our hands, whether we want to or not. And so, of course, you can still do it, but there's just less of a place for that to actually land. And thus, it's harder to get feedback. And the way we develop as humans, the way we improve, is we put something into the world and we get feedback on it. And that's just becoming more and more challenging, other than through more AI, which, kind of feeds back into the same system. So, fascinating time. I would love to hear from anyone, especially people listening to this podcast after the fact. Send me write in, let me know, what are you noticing in terms of the implications? What are you noticing happening in your fields, your corresponding fields? How is AI having an impact? Either positive, negative, whatever it happens to be. Okay. Let's talk about maximizing not giving a fuck. So as humans, we're always getting better at the game we're playing. One of my coaches and mentors, Jody Jan Larson, would often say this. I think she might have been quoting someone else, but the idea of this um, operates at an ontological level. So how I am being in the moment, I'm always improving at being that way. So for example, let me see. I shouldn't have said for example until I had one. Let me see if I can craft an example for us as I sip tea. Okay, great. We will use Adam as an example. So growing up, I didn't like, I developed an, we'll call it like an allergy to being rejected. This is not particularly original of me. Many of us can relate to this, it's very human. And the particular places I didn't like being rejected were when I would reach out and invite people to my party to come hang out with me. Do you want to come over to my house and play? Whatever. And so initially, I learned to create ways to kind of, how do I invite people to hang out with me, but without, hey, Con, it's good to see you, man. I'm going to come back to what you wrote in a sec. I want to spotlight that. I would find ways to invite people to play with me, but in such a manner that I could kind of get around the possibility of rejection. So with friends in like around grade 5, grade 6, one of the things I was doing was I had a script in my head when I would call up my friends. So it was sort of like, okay, I'm going to call them up, I'm going to invite them, or I'm going to say hi, I'm going to talk about school, and then I'm going to like blah, blah, blah. I want to be clear. When I talk about it like a script, it makes it sound like a grand thing that I'd put in an Excel spreadsheet. This isn't like a 46-year-old script. This is a grade 6 kid's script. But nevertheless, I was using strategy and planning to soften the blow of someone saying no to me. And as time went on in my life, so that's what I was doing, right? And it was who I was being. What I was doing was getting on the phone, speaking to my friend through a script, and using that to blah, blah, blah. So on the surface of what I was doing, you could say the game was Adam's getting good at being a little bit robotic and using a script to invite people to come do stuff. That is not the full story of the game I was playing and getting better at. Underneath, who I was being was avoidant of rejection and mitigating for its impact. Right? So that's the being underneath, and the doing on the top was in that moment having a little bit of a script in my head, knowing how I was going to work my way into it, inviting them, and also knowing how I was going to sort of like, oh, that's okay, no worries, I've got something to do anyhow, you know, if they said no. And so as my life went on, I got better and better and better at strategizing around rejection and mitigating for its impact. I created new ways to do that. I learned new approaches to do that. And I got better at heading rejection off at the pass as part of that game. So as time went on, I would invite people with a script. Okay, blah, blah, blah. As time went on, I got better at even determining ahead of even calling them, hey, is this person likely to want to do something with me? Maybe I'll find out their schedule first. And then as time went on, I wouldn't even call them. I would just text them because that was another barrier of safety. That form of rejection was a little easier to be with than the form where it's on the phone in real time and they get to be with me. And then as time went on, I got even better at being fine not doing stuff with people that much and just hanging out by myself in my sweet office where all my cool stuff is, all my magic cards over there and what have you. And so what's happening as I'm aging is I'm getting better and better and better at the game I'm playing. So let me pause. Dr. Kathy Nash, I love what you just said there. I'm going to put a pin in what I've been talking about. Just so Kathy, hi Kathy, thanks for sharing that. Kathy says is a brilliant mind's defense mechanism. Yeah, very, very. This is basically my inner child, we could call it, using my brilliance as a tool to protect against something that it was afraid of, which was rejection. Something that I was afraid of, which was rejection. So it's very, very strategic. It's very brilliant. And I want to be clear that that game I was getting better at playing served in many, many situations. Like it made it so that I was very good about asking for meetings and having a feel for what's the best way to ask this lawyer for a meeting who's very busy. And I know that I need to find the right way to get them to say yes. So none of these strategies are wrong or bad. We don't want to vilify them. It's just an always on automatic. It's the game I'm always playing. And I'm getting better at the game I'm always playing. Really great point, I think. And our good friend Khan says it's definitely the case. He's speaking to AI, definitely the case with coding as well. I personally think that will push us to innovate on new frontiers. But before we get there at the signal to noise ratio, just like you said, it's going to be hard. 100% agree, Khan. I think the fantasy or the desire that a lot of us humans have, and certainly that I have when we're looking at transformation, is that um, circumstances will change and then we will rise to the occasion and we will be like, wow, cool. I no longer have to do X. I'm going to step into Y. But I think instead, it's much less pleasant than that. What happens is X is no longer available. And then there's this period of almost like revolution where some of us actually, every revolution has victims isn't the right word, but we'll use that sort of like people that don't thrive through it, that don't survive it almost, right? Sometimes literally, other times just like they fall out of the job or they can't retrain or whatever it happens to be. And then in that process, it's sort of like the old ways are no longer working. We have to adapt. And so I think this is what we're seeing with AI is that it's cutting out from under us a lot of the old ways and it's forcing us to adapt. It's just very challenging to adapt. And the more we hang on to the old ways, the more challenging it is. So yeah, really, really good point, Con. Okay, so where I was going was I was describing, right? We're always getting better at the game we're playing. And for me, one of the games I was playing was how do I manage, mitigate, and strategize around rejection and its impact on my heart? One of the things that I see is popular these days is kind of this idea of not giving a fuck. It's almost like being immune to the impact other people can have on us. And so there's like a thing worth looking at here, which is when we're getting better and better at not giving a fuck, what we're getting better at doing is hardening our heart. We're getting better at not letting anything impact us. So I can show up and I can say what I want to say. This is the gift of not giving a fuck, of NGAF. Say what I want to say as like a leader. And then you can be like, Adam, that sucked and I didn't like any of it. And I'm immune to it. I'm untouched by your feedback, by your comments, by your criticisms. So, you can be a YouTube influencer, which I clearly am with my 3 viewers, and you can put your ideas out there and you can get a bunch of crappy comments and you can keep going. Incredible skill. But like all skills, we want to check in. Is this the game I want to be getting better at? Is this the one game I really want to be playing? And NGAF, not giving a fuck, has some benefits and some consequences. Hey, Farah, nice to see you. Really enjoying the content I've seen you putting out lately, by the way. Speaking of signal in the midst of noise, the more I get better at closing my heart such that I don't have to feel the impact. I don't have to sort of worry about what you think about me. I also shut down the ability for you to have an impact on me. I shut down the ability for the world to give me any kind of feedback whatsoever because I'm hardening myself and I don't care. Right? That's the essence of not giving a fuck. I don't care. It doesn't matter. We slowly become a product unto ourselves. We isolate and separate ourselves from the world. And so this ability to weather a storm, to batten down the hatches and not let the water come in, to not let the world stop us, it's really, really important. It's sort of like I heard someone describe it as we need to learn how to survive empathy. Because empathy can ruin us, emotionally speaking, it can devastate us. We're like, oh my God, what's happening in Ukraine? If your heart's too open, we'll call it, it can be almost impossible to wake up and read the news without being destroyed. And then how do you do anything? You're just like, I'm destroyed. I can't, there's nothing I can bring myself to do. I'm just completely obliterated by what's going on here. And so we need to learn how to batten down the hatches to an extent, but it's also valuable to recognize, like, is this the game I want to keep getting better at this point in my life? And, one of the places I think maximizing not giving a fuck is really, really prominent these days in this modern world is politics. Because these are people that have to make unpopular choices one way or the other. There's no popular choice in politics for the most part. Have to make that decision and then have to be with people's feedback about that. And so the thing to do is to harden yourself, close yourself off, isolate, make your heart, untouchable. And then you can do what must be done. We also see this a lot in entrepreneur. My camera's getting a little dodgy. We also see this a lot in entrepreneurial and like, entrepreneurial. Yeah. Like high level leadership is to become hardened such that they can make stuff happen, even though the world around them is like, that's crazy. Your idea will never hold water. It's very important to be able to forge a path through the naysayers. But what happens over time when that's the game we're playing is that we start to reach a point in our development as a leader where we recognize culture is important. We recognize that people need to feel valued and heard in an organization to stick around and to grow. But who we've learned to be in the game that we're continually playing underneath is I'm getting better and better and better at not caring and not being impactable by the world. And so this is a very long-winded way to get to this underlying point, which is this is why we end up with leaders who will do things like set up open door policies and you go and talk to them and they listen to you, but it doesn't matter. Your speaking to them has zero impact because the game that you as a leader have gotten better and better and better at playing is not giving a fuck. And so it doesn't matter. You can put yourself in a million different rooms with a million different stakeholders who have a million different things to share to you, and you can listen to them. You can do all the doing that you're supposed to do. But if the game that you're currently unconsciously playing is not letting the world mess you up, not giving a fuck, not caring, having a hardened heart, then all of those million conversations are going to be water off a duck's back. They're just going to completely bounce off of you. And so this is part of the gift in starting to consciously get clear, what's the game I'm playing? If you want a way to sort of distinguish this for yourself, one thing you can do is take note of like 4 or 5 sort of situations that stand out for you in your life in terms of like, oh, here's an example of how I show up in my life. They can be whatever, but like interactions with people in some manner or form. Here's the way I show up in life. Here's the way I show up in life. Here's the way I show up in life. Look at those 5 examples and ask yourself, like, what's the way of being that is underneath all of this? So this work is to sort of look at the dressing on the table on top, what's all the stuff on the surface, and then distinguish underneath that, what is the way of being that is being kind of modeled by all of these 5 different ways. So you're drawing out the commonalities so you can see like what's the way of being underneath. So, some people, it might be like, oh, I gave my last dollar to that person and I held the door open in this moment and then rain got knocked on me. And over here, I worked that extra shift, even though like I really wanted to go home, but blah, blah, blah. So and the way of being you're looking for is usually kind of like, there's going to be good to it. And there's also going to be a consequence that's not so good for you to it. So it might be like, oh, the game I'm playing is being generous, but at the expense of myself. You want to get clear on the double whammy, because what we want to do when we're looking at ourselves is we want to like focus just on, in terms of our being, the highlight. Oh, I'm being brilliant. Oh, the way of the game I'm getting better at playing is generosity. But that kind of only, in this sort of exercise, only highlights 1/2 of the game we're playing, and every choice we make has benefits and consequences. And so you kind of want to look for like I'm doing X at the cost of Y. That's the way of being underneath those 5 things you're looking for. And if you can start to discern that, it's really cool because it allows you to start to become more conscious of like, oh, this is one of the ways where I am actually reliable to be generous or to be brilliant, but it's coming at, that example I gave, like, oh, I'm really reliable to be brilliant. And I'm finding ways to not have to feel rejected, but at the cost of connection or at the cost of intimacy. So it can be a valuable thing to discern that for yourself. 1056. I'm going to pour a little more tea. We're going to dive into one more of these topics. I'm super interested to hear from other people. If you're listening now, or if you're listening after the fact, other areas you're seeing disruption due to AI. Where are you seeing the gap between noise and signal shrink? I just thinking of this, going back to Khan's point, like when I was a software developer, there were a few people that were self-taught, usually very brilliant. You could just tell immediately they're geniuses. But for the most part, a lot of us had gone to school and studied this stuff. And now that's no longer a gatekeeper, because AI can write really good code, often better code than humans, because it can do internal testing and stuff like that. And so, there's an example where it used to be sort of you'd spot the junk code really quickly. Now, much, 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 much harder to do. So, curious of other places. Yeah, Kathy, that's great. Kathy just saying, like, one of those costs might be like, I'm really generous, but at the cost of my authenticity. So, what is the way of being? The game you're playing is sort of like a thing you get that comes at a cost. And it's not to suggest you set things up like that deliberately. It's just that any choice we're always making has benefits and consequences. So we're sort of looking for like, what's the benefit, but also what's the consequence? What's the cost? Okay, let's do. I think a good topic for us to finish off on is leadership happening in partnership with our circumstances. And so the nature of how this plays out is that often our leadership is what we'd call at the effect of the circumstances that are around us. So it sounds sort of like I would make X happen, or I wish to make X happen, or I'm committed to making X happen, but this. And our consequences are often in the form of the person above us or around us, or the way that the world is being or unwilling to be. So it's sort of like, I would show up and do this, but the world is not receptive to it, and therefore I'm not going to do it. Or I would make these changes at my company, but the person above me is the bottleneck and it's not available to me. Or I would create this thing in the world, but my peer group is not up for it. And so circumstances, when I use that term, I'm referring to anything that is external to me. So like the fact that I'm wearing this necklace is a part of circumstances, the way I'm using the term. The fact that this is the shape of my office is a circumstance. The fact that the sky is overcast and it's raining outside is circumstance. The fact that my wife is the way she is, circumstances meaning anything external to myself. And this sort of like, I would do X or I would make X happen, but this is the how do I distinguish this? This is sort of like, this is the place where leadership happens, and it's also the place where our leadership falls down. It's the moment. It's the edge in which leadership is actually stepped into. So it's very compelling to put our leadership and what we say we're committed to at the effect of the world around us. Oh, one other circumstance I want to mention. I would make this happen, but for my money. Money is like money and time are our number one and number two circumstances by which we end our leadership practice. So the thing about leadership is that it's about being able to create something in the world in the face or in partnership with our circumstances, as opposed to in exception to our circumstances. Thank you, Khan. That's really kind. So I would make this happen, but for that thing is where I'm sort of like, I would do this, except my circumstances look this way, therefore I'm not going to. That's not really what leadership is about. Leadership is about, I'm going to make this thing happen. And part of that equation is that this is how things currently look. So, given this is how things currently look, what does my leadership call for from me? Who do I need to be? How do I need to move forward? How do I need to relate to what's going on in my life? So, this is really a challenging place for us to step into because our circumstances are so compelling. And on some level, they occur very, very, very real. They are real, I should say. And I'm going to reference one of my all time favorite books here, which is a book called Flatland by Edwin Abbott, Edwin R. Abbott. And I assume that the R stands for Reggie, classic Reggie. So in Flatland, forgive me if you've already heard me lay this summary out. I'm going to do it very quickly here. The first third of the story is all setting up this two-dimensional world that a man named Mr. Square lives in. And the first third of the story is fascinating because it's a really shrewd commentary on the social class system at the time when the book was written, which was 1860s. So old ass book. And it does a brilliant job of satirizing and laying bare the state of women, the state of classes, and how different people are more privileged and why, and how that's related to the way they were born, all of this stuff. Phenomenal social commentary. But you don't have to worry about that if that's not your vibe. The remaining 2/3 of the book are about Lord Sphere from the three-dimensional world coming and visiting Mr. Square in his two-dimensional world. And Mr. Square is astounded by Lord Sphere. He doesn't understand what Lord Sphere can do. For example, he locks Lord Sphere in a room and he turns the key and he puts it in his pocket. And the next thing he knows, Lord Sphere appears beside him. And he's like, how did he do that? The door was locked. I don't understand. Of course, we, being three-dimensional beings, know that he just locked Lord Sphere in this stupid rectangular shape. And Lord Sphere just kind of raised himself up out of it, moved over to the left, and then came back down into contact with Mr. Square's plane of existence. So Mr. Square's circumstances, the locked room, all of that, they appear completely real to Mr. Square. They are real from his perspective, his world. But from the perspective of Lord Sphere's world, they're irrelevant. They're not a concern. And this idea that leadership happens in partnership with our circumstances is about being willing to, even if we haven't yet seen how it looks or haven't yet stepped into it or even have a hard time conceptualizing its existence, we're willing to operate from the place. We step into our leadership from the place that I may not see how these two things can coexist, but I'm willing to operate from the belief that they can. I am willing to create something in my life from the premise that these two things are not at odds with each other. And that takes a lot of courage, an inordinate amount of courage, because the more we get afraid, the more we look to the reality of life as we currently know it. And that reality reinforces that this is not possible. And the closer you come to making that step from 2D up into 3D, from creating that breakthrough, that's what we call a breakthrough, when you make that step into a new dimension of perspective. The closer you come to that, the more your fear is going to kick up, because the more is at risk. You are doing something that by the rules of your current two-dimensional perspective is wrong, is foolish, is dumb. So, a really simple example would be someone that has a rule that they've learned that all debt is bad. And this rule has allowed them to never fall into trouble with credit cards, never get into trouble with creditors. It's made them very reliable to, say not buy stuff until they have enough, and therefore be really reliable to like save up money, and they're also very good at like delayed gratification because they won't get anything until they've saved up enough money, blah, 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 right? But things like going to school for a degree and getting a loan to do that, or getting a mortgage for a house, are challenging, if not impossible, for this person, depending on how rigid their rules are. For the sake of this example, we're going to set the rules up super rigid. So any form of debt, bad. Gas card, bad. No debt whatsoever. The more rigid we make the example, the easier it is to see. It's not really about whether that's right or wrong. And so this person, in order to, let's say that they want it, there's a part of them that really wants to like increase their scope, their breadth, their impact in the world. They're clear they want to deepen their learning. They want to really dive into something. They're clear that going to school is the thing to do. They want that. They want that sooner. And they're also like, on some level, they really believe, this might be a stretch for some of you these days, going to school will help and it will earn me more money. What happens is now they are put into a confrontation. The thing they want to create inside the 2D world would require save up enough money from where you currently are such that you then have enough money to afford school, then you can go to school. So in 20 years time, assuming that school stays relatively in line with inflation, which it has not done, then you'll get to go to school, graduate, and then you can make money. But this person actually wants to start doing this sooner. They don't really want to delay that way. And so what happens is that they're coming into a confrontation with the rules of their 2D world, so to speak. They're coming into confrontation with this idea that all debt is bad. And in order to step into that new paradigm, in order to lead, so to speak, themselves, their lives, in order to forge into that new world, they actually have to basically break the existing rules. They have to have it that it's sort of like, given going to school requires taking on debt, and I'm committed to going to school, you could try to solve that from the 2D worlds. I will wait 20 years, I will save up, blah blah blah. But instead what ends up happening is he has to come to this perspective of leadership. School will take debt, and I want to do it now. And so how do I create those two things? How do I step into that from a place where they're both allowed, where it's both possible, where I don't have to manage for one or the other? So this is like, it can be helpful here as a practice if we're committed to, like, growing what we're capable of in life, which is kind of my secret code for leadership. It's not really like become a great CEO or something. It's just like, I want to create more. I want to be able to create more in the world for myself, whatever. If you want to do that, one of the ways you can start to look at this is, what are the stuff that I really want to do that might not be happening, or it's happening at a slower pace than I'd like? And what do I have levered against that? What is the circumstance that I am putting that at odds with? So I would do this except for, first of all, just laying that out for yourself can be really helpful. That can really create some like awareness for you, some consciousness. But the second thing would probably be, okay, got it. So what would I do if I knew that these two things did not have to be at odds with themselves? What if it was possible for these two things to coexist? What if it was possible that this didn't have to slow down that? What action would I take if I trusted that? And I want to finish this by saying that might be a bridge too far for you, and that's okay. It requires courage to step into this, or it requires the option being taken away from us. And that goes back to kind of what we've been talking about with AI, right? You can also wait, and eventually the option often is taken away, and then it's like, great, now what? Now that we're here, what is necessity going to propel you into? Okay. So let's see. We talked about boredom. We talked about signal to noise ratio. We talked about leadership happening in partnership with our circumstance. Oh, I'm going to speak to one other aspect of this, which is, I would make this thing happen, except the person above me or the people beside me at work aren't allowing me to, or are in the way, or are bottlenecking me, or do this because that. The way we work with that is we say, given that, so for example, given that my boss, hold on, let me back up and make this more salient. Kathy saying leading in the gray. Yes, I absolutely agree, Kathy. It's about leading in the gray rather than the black or white. Being willing to be in the uncertainty that the gray creates for ourselves. So, um, let's imagine that we got someone who's saying, here's the thing. I want to grow in my company. I want to step into leadership. I want to rise up. Great. What's the feedback you're getting? The feedback I'm getting is that my boss says I don't share enough and he doesn't know where my project's at and I'm not giving enough feedback. But here's the thing. He shows up to our meetings and he's unprepared and we spend so much time trying to bring things up to speed and so it's like it's not me, it's him. Okay. So the conversation here that the person's currently in is I would want to move up, but my boss is bottlenecking and I can't. The shift is given I'm committed to moving up and given that my boss is giving me the feedback that I'm not providing enough detail, and given that they're showing up to this meeting unprepared. So given all of those three things, if we stopped complaining about them or insisting they should be different, but instead accept them as just like, okay, that's how it is, and the commitment is to move up, who is there for me to be? How is there for me to show up in those meetings? And I would assert, as an example, it would be like, well, one, I'm gonna take it upon myself to prep my boss before the meeting, so that knowing he tends to show up unprepared, he's got everything he needs prior to that. I'm gonna do that preparation for him. But Adam, isn't that coddling him? No, what it's doing is acting in alignment with your commitment. It's ensuring that you can create the thing you want to create regardless of how people are showing up around you. Okay, got it. So I'm going to show up, I'm going to give him the details. And second, my boss is telling me he doesn't feel like he's getting enough from me, even though I feel that's not true. Okay, great. But my boss is saying that. The feedback I'm getting is I need more detail from you. So I'm going to start looking to see how I could provide more detail. Maybe I'll ask my boss, can you help me understand in particular what kind of detail? Is this what I'm providing you right now enough detail? So all of these things, notice what I'm doing is I'm effectively letting other people off the hook. I'm taking my boss off the hook. Okay, got it. That's how things are. It's the same as if I was like, I'll look outside and it's raining. That's the way it is. So what am I going to do? And then I'm taking it upon myself to create whatever situation's required for that not to be a bottleneck towards the thing that I say I'm committed to. So this is leading up is often much less sexy than we want it to be and much less vindictive. Because leading up, as we think of it, is typically like, I'm going to get my boss the feedback that no one else is. I'm going to tell them they suck ass and it's going to blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to take all of the stuff I learned at the transformational leader and I'm going to tell them they should do it. None of that is leading up. Leading up is accepting the person exactly as they are, getting clear for yourself, who do I need to be, given what I'm committed to, and given all of that stuff that I'm going to just accept as it is. That allows us to lead up. It doesn't require our leaders to be any different. It allows us to show up as the best possible leader as we are moving up, as we are interacting with those above us. Cool beans. Okay. We're going to wind down there. Big thanks to Sunny, America, Khan, Kathy, Vera. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for your comments. Really cool. It's neat. We got cross-platform action, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. As always, if you have particular thoughts around any of this after the fact or during, I would love to hear any comments, anything that shows up. If you have your own take on any of this, please share it. Not so I can argue with it, but more so that, frankly, I can learn from you. And any situations where you're noticing AI showing up that's creating disruption or anything, I'd love to hear about that too. Have an awesome weekend, and we'll catch you all soon. Bye-bye.